The sun cast long shadows across the Arizona desert, painting the mountains with hues of gold and crimson. Thomas "Iron Tom" Sullivan sat on his weathered porch, a cup of black coffee growing cold in his calloused hands as he gazed out at his sprawling ranch. To his neighbors in the small town of Sierra Vista, he was just another aging rancher, spending his retirement tending to cattle and fixing fences. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. None of them knew that beneath his quiet demeanor lay one of the most decorated Navy SEALs in recent history, a man whose missions had shaped conflicts across the globe. The warm desert breeze carried the scent of sage and mesquite across Tom's property, a peaceful 500-acre spread nestled against the Huachuca Mountains. His boots creaked against the wooden planks of the porch as he rose, his joints protesting. The movement, 25 years of special operations, had left their mark on his body, but his mind remained sharp as ever. The ranch had been his sanctuary for the past 5 years, a place where he could finally find peace after decades of combat. His German shepherd Shadow lay at his feet, ears perking up at every distant sound. The dog had been with him since his last deployment, a companion who understood the weight of vigilance. Tom reached down to scratch behind Shadow's ears, a small smile crossing his weathered face. The ranch had been his late wife Maria's dream, and maintaining it kept her memory alive. She had passed away shortly after he retired, cancer-taking, before they could fully enjoy their golden years together. The morning routine was simple but satisfying. Tom would wake before dawn, check the fences, tend to his small herd of cattle, and maintain the buildings. It was honest work, far removed from the classified operations and life-or-death decisions that had defined his previous life. The locals knew him as a helpful neighbor, always ready to lend a hand, but never one to talk much about his past. What they didn't know was that the ranch's strategic location near the Mexican border had been carefully chosen. Tom had seen enough during his career to know that quiet places often held dark secrets. The surrounding mountains and vast desert made the area a natural corridor for those wanting to move undetected, whether they were desperate migrants or something more sinister. Tom had noticed changes in recent months. New faces at the local diner, expensive SUVs with tinted windows passing through town, and whispered conversations that stopped when he entered the room. His instincts, honed through years of combat, told him something was brewing. The cartel's influence had been growing in the region, but so far they had left him alone. That was about to change. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning. Tom was repairing a section of fence in the southern pasture when he spotted fresh tire tracks cutting across his land. They weren't from his truck or any of the local ranchers' vehicles he recognized. The tracks were deep from heavy vehicles, and they led toward an old service road that wound through the mountains into Mexico. Shadow growled softly, drawing Tom's attention to movement in the tree line. 3 men emerged, dressed casually, but moving with purpose. Tom's trained eye immediately spotted the telltale bulges of concealed weapons beneath their clothes. The lead man, tall with a silver watch that caught the sunlight, approached with an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Buenos dias, señor," the man called out, his accent thick but his English precise. "I am Rodrigo Valdez. My associates and I represent some interested parties who would like to discuss your property." Tom straightened slowly, his posture relaxed but ready. He'd Seen enough predators in his time to recognize the look in Valdez's eyes. "Not interested in selling," he replied simply, his voice gravelly from years of barking orders in combat zones. Valdez's smile widened, showing perfect white teeth. "Perhaps you misunderstand, senor. We're not here to buy. We're here to inform you of some changes. This region is now under new management, shall we say. We require certain accommodations from local landowners." Tom's expression remained neutral, but his mind was already calculating distances, angles, and potential threats. The two men flanking Valdez had spread out slightly, their hands never far from their concealed weapons. They were professionals, but their positioning told Tom they were used to intimidating civilians, not engaging trained operators. "My land isn't accommodating anyone," Tom responded, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "I suggest you leave, the way you came." Valdez's smile faded slightly. "You are an old man living alone, Senor Sullivan. It would be unfortunate if accidents were to happen out here. The desert can be very dangerous." Tom met Valdez's gaze steadily. "Yes, it can. Be." The threat hung in the air between them. Shadow's low growl continued, the dog's muscles tense and ready. After a moment, Valdez nodded slightly. "Think about our offer, senor. We will return tomorrow for your answer. For your sake, make the wise choice." As the men retreated to their vehicle, a black SUV parked just beyond his property line, Tom remained motionless, watching until they disappeared in a cloud of dust. Only then did he allow himself to feel the familiar surge of adrenaline, the combat awareness that had kept him alive through countless operations. He knew what was coming. Groups like this didn't take no for an answer. They would return in force, expecting to find a helpless old rancher. Instead, they would find something very different. Tom spent the rest of the day preparing. In the barn, beneath a false floor he'd installed years ago, lay a cache of equipment that would have raised eyebrows at the local sheriff's office. Weapons, tactical gear, communication equipment, and enough ammunition to hold off a small army. He hadn't maintained these supplies out of paranoia, but out of the same preparation that had served him well throughout his career. As he checked and cleaned each weapon, memories of past operations filtered through his mind. The midnight raids in Afghanistan, the jungle warfare in Southeast Asia, the classified operations that would never see the light of day. He had hoped to leave that life behind, but sometimes the past had other plans. By nightfall, Tom had transformed the ranch into a defensive position. Motion sensors placed at key points would alert him to any approach. The barn and house had been fortified, with multiple exit routes and firing positions established. He'd even prepared a few surprises for unwelcome visitors, drawing on skills that had made him legendary among his fellow SEALs. In his office, Tom pulled out a satellite phone he hadn't used in years. He punched in a number from memory, one that would connect him to people who owed him favors. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Who the hell still has this number?" "It's Tom Marcus. I'm calling in that favor from Kandahar." There was a pause on the line. "Damn, old man, must be serious if you're dredging that up." "What's the situation?" Tom explained briefly, knowing the cartel's reputation would have reached even his old contacts. Marcus listened without interruption. "Jesus, Tom, the Sinaloa cartel doesn't mess around. How many you think they'll send?" "Enough to make a point. They don't know what they're walking into." Marcus chuckled darkly. "No, they sure don't. Give me 12 hours. I can have some old friends in the area, good ones. Appreciate it. But this needs to be contained. Local law enforcement is compromised, and I don't want a war breaking out here. Just be ready if things go sideways. You sure? You're not as young as you used to be, Tom. Tom smiled grimly. Neither are they. After ending the call, Tom walked the perimeter of his property one last time. Shadow padded silently beside him, the dog's behavior reflecting his own heightened alertness. The desert night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Arizona, sky like diamonds on black velvet. It was the kind of night that had always made him feel at peace, but tonight it just provided good visibility for what was to come. Back in the house, Tom settled into his favorite chair, an old leather recliner that had been Maria's last gift to him. On the table beside him lay his modified M4 carbine, a Glock 19, and a tactical radio scanner picking up local frequencies. He could hear chatter in Spanish, coded messages that told him the cartel was preparing their move. As midnight approached, Tom thought about the irony of his situation. He had chosen this quiet corner of Arizona to escape violence, to find something, pure and honest in raising cattle and working the land. Instead, the skills he'd hoped to leave behind might be the only thing keeping him alive through what was coming. Shadow's ears suddenly pricked up, his head turning toward the southern perimeter. Moments later, Tom's motion sensors began registering movement. Multiple vehicles approaching from different directions, their headlights off, moving with purpose through the darkness. Tom stood slowly, his movements economical and precise. He checked his weapons one last time, muscle memory from countless missions taking over. The cartel was coming to claim what they thought was theirs, expecting to find an old rancher too scared to fight back. They were about to learn a very expensive lesson about appearances. The first vehicle stopped just outside his main gate, its engine idling quietly in the night. Through his night vision scope, Tom counted 6 men emerging from the SUV, all heavily armed. 2 more vehicles approached from different directions, spreading out to surround the property. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Their movements were coordinated, professional, but they were using tactics designed to intimidate civilians, not engage a trained operator. Tom allowed himself a small smile. The night was just beginning, and he had survived far worse odds in places much more dangerous than this. The cartel was about to discover that some old men didn't need saving. They were the ones you should fear. Through his night vision optics, Tom watched as more cartel members emerged from their vehicles. Their movements were practiced, but Tom spotted flaws in their approach, gaps in their coverage, predictable patterns. He counted 15 men total, armed with a mix of assault rifles and submachine guns. They weren't trying to be subtle anymore. Valdez's voice cut through the darkness, amplified by a megaphone. "Senor Sullivan, we have returned for your answer. Come out now, and we can discuss this like gentlemen." Tom remained silent, watching through his scope as 2 men approached his front gate. They carried bolt cutters, clearly expecting the simple chain and padlock they'd seen earlier. Instead, they found the gate electrified, a modification Tom had made years ago. The first man's scream echoed across the property as the current sent him sprawling backward. The sound of gunfire erupted immediately, cartel members firing blindly. At the house and barn, Tom stayed motionless, letting them waste ammunition. He'd replaced his windows with bulletproof glass long ago, another paranoid preparation that was now proving its worth. When the firing ceased, Valdez's voice came again, anger replacing his previous false courtesy. "You think this is a game, old man? We will burn your ranch to the ground with you in it." Tom keyed his radio, his voice calm and measured. "You made 3 mistakes, Valdez. First, you threatened a man who has nothing left to lose. Second, you assumed I was alone." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And third, you thought I was helpless." As if on cue, Shadow's bark echoed from somewhere in the darkness, followed by shouts of confusion from the cartel members. Tom had trained the dog for exactly this scenario, creating distractions, drawing attention, making the enemy think there were multiple threats. Through his thermal scope, Tom watched as the cartel members began to split up, exactly as he'd hoped. Their training was breaking down, fear and uncertainty replacing their previous confidence. He squeezed the trigger twice, dropping 2 men before they realized what was happening. Chaos erupted. The cartel members began firing wildly into the darkness, their muzzle flashes ruining their night vision. Tom moved silently through his house, using pre-planned routes to different firing positions. Each shot was deliberate, precise, the result of decades of training and combat experience. "He's just one man!" Valdez shouted, but his voice carried an edge of panic now. "Surround the house! Burn him out!" Tom allowed himself a grim smile. They still didn't understand what they were dealing with. He triggered the first of several prepared charges, creating controlled explosions that forced the cartel members to cluster together. From his new position, he could see Valdez taking cover behind one of their vehicles, shouting orders into a radio. More vehicles were approaching, reinforcements. Tom had expected this. He moved to the barn, using underground tunnels he'd dug years ago. Maria had thought he was being excessive when he'd insisted on building them. "Who digs escape tunnels on a cattle ranch?" she'd asked. Tom had just smiled and kept digging. From the barn's upper level, Tom had a perfect vantage point. He watched through his thermal scope as more cartel members arrived, bringing their total numbers to nearly 30. They were setting up proper positions now, learning from their initial mistakes. But Tom had been fighting smarter, better-equipped enemies since before many of these men were born. He activated another set of charges, these loaded with tear gas instead of explosives. The gas clouds drifted across the property, carried by the desert wind. The cartel members' shouts turned to coughs and curses. Their tactical formation broke apart as men stumbled blindly, trying to escape the gas. Shadow's barking came from a new direction, causing more confusion. Tom had trained the dog to move between different positions, creating the illusion of multiple animals. It was a technique he'd learned from indigenous trackers during operations in South America. Tom's radio crackled. "You cannot hide forever, old man." Valdez's voice was strained, his composure cracking. "We will find you." "You still don't get it," Tom replied calmly. "I'm not hiding from you. I'm hunting you." To prove his point, Tom took down 3 more cartel members in rapid succession. His shots were precise, disabling rather than killing when possible. He'd seen enough death in his career. He didn't need to add to the toll unless absolutely necessary. The cartel's response was predictable. They tried to bracket his position with automatic fire. But Tom was already moving, using routes he'd memorized through years of practicing for exactly this scenario. Every step, every position, every angle had been calculated and rehearsed. Valdez was losing control of his men. Through his thermal scope, Tom could see them clustering together, their movements becoming more erratic. Fear was taking hold, the fear of an invisible enemy who seemed to be everywhere at once. Tom triggered more distractions. Flashbangs and smoke grenades placed strategically around the property. The explosions and smoke created chaos, making it impossible for the cartel members to maintain any kind of cohesive response. "Fall back!" Valdez's voice cracked over the radio. "Fall back to the vehicles!" But retreat wasn't as simple as they'd hoped. Tom had planned for this too. Caltrops scattered across likely escape routes shredded their tires. Hidden spike strips disabled more vehicles. The cartel members found themselves trapped, their escape routes cut off by their own disabled vehicles. From his new position, Tom could see Valdez frantically trying to restore order. The cartel leader was exposed, separated from his men. It was the opportunity Tom had been waiting for. He lined up his shot carefully, then put a round through Valdez's shoulder. Not fatal, but definitely incapacitating. Valdez's scream of pain seemed to break something in his men's resolve. The organized assault devolved into panic. Some tried to flee on foot, only to find themselves lost in the darkness of the desert. Others surrendered, dropping their weapons and raising their hands. Tom moved methodically through his property, securing weapons and restraining those who had surrendered. Years of combat experience had taught him to be thorough, to never assume a threat was completely neutralized until he'd confirmed it personally. By dawn, it was over. 15 cartel members were dead or seriously wounded, another dozen restrained. And awaiting the arrival of authorities, Tom knew he could trust. Former operators now working in law enforcement. The rest had fled into the desert, where local border patrol would likely find them. Valdez sat propped against one of the disabled vehicles, his shoulder bandaged, his expensive clothes covered in dust and blood. Tom approached him slowly, shadow at his heel. Who are you?" Valdez asked, his voice weak from pain and exhaustion. Tom looked down at him, his expression neutral. "Just an old rancher, protecting what's his." The sun was rising over the mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Tom surveyed his property. There was damage to repair, bullet holes to patch, vehicles to clear away, but the ranch still stood, and more importantly, it remained his. Shadow pressed against his leg, and Tom reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Good boy," he murmured. "We did good." In the distance he could hear sirens approaching. He knew there would be questions, investigations, paperwork. The cartel wouldn't take this defeat lightly. They might try again, with greater numbers, or different tactics, but Tom would be ready. This wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was his home, his purpose, his last mission. As he waited for the authorities to arrive, Tom thought about Maria. She would have understood. She had always understood that beneath his quiet exterior lay a warrior's heart. The ranch had been her dream, but protecting it had become his. The morning wind carried the scent of sage and gunpowder across the property. Tom Sullivan, the old rancher, the former Navy SEAL, stood watch over his land. He had found his peace, here in the Arizona desert, and he would defend that peace with every skill, every lesson, every scar that his years of service had given him. The cartel had made a crucial mistake. They had seen an old man living alone and thought him vulnerable. They hadn't understood that some men don't grow weaker with age. They grow more dangerous. They carry within them the accumulated knowledge of countless battles, the muscle memory of innumerable operations, and the unwavering will to protect what's theirs. As the first Border Patrol vehicles appeared on the horizon, Tom allowed himself a small smile. Let them come, he thought. Let them all come. This old seal still had some fight left in him. The day was just beginning, and there was work to be done. The ranch needed repairs, fences needed mending, and cattle needed tending. But first, Tom would make sure everyone understood one simple truth. This land was protected, not by fences or gates or guards, but by something far more formidable. An old warrior who had found something worth fighting for. The message would spread quickly through the cartel's networks. The ranch near Sierra Vista, the one they thought would be an easy target, was now marked as untouchable. The old man who lived there wasn't just any rancher. He was a ghost from America's secret wars, a shadow warrior who had traded his combat boots for cowboy boots but had never lost his edge. Tom Sullivan turned toward his house, Shadow trotting faithfully beside him. There would be more battles to come, but for now he had chores to do. After all, he was just an old rancher who happened to be one of the deadliest men alive. The desert wind carried his quiet words across the battlefield that had once been his peaceful ranch. Semper Fi, in a dimly lit hospital room in Sierra Vista, Diego Ortiz lay recovering from his wounds, his mind replaying the battle at Sullivan's ranch. A shadow fell across his bed. El Coyote himself had come, flanked by heavily armed guards. The cartel leader's presence made even the medical staff scatter from the room. "You failed me, Diego," El Coyote said softly, his calm tone more threatening than any shout. "But more importantly, you learned something valuable about our adversary." "Tell me." Diego shifted painfully, his tactical mind analyzing the defeat. "He's different, Jefe. Not just his skills, his spirit. He fights for something deeper than territory or profit. The ranch. It's not just land to him." El Coyote nodded slowly. "Then we don't just take his land. We break his spirit first." Meanwhile, Tom Sullivan wasn't just rebuilding his ranch. He was transforming it. The battle had shown him that isolation made him vulnerable. As he repaired the damage, he began implementing a new vision, one that would turn his property into more than just a defensive position. Local teenagers, many from troubled backgrounds, started showing up at his gate. Word had spread about the old rancher who stood up to the cartel. Tom saw an opportunity. He put them to work, not just rebuilding fences and barns, but learning. Discipline, responsibility, and self-respect. "You're not just fixing a fence," he told Miguel, a 16-year-old with gang tattoos and angry eyes. "You're building something bigger than yourself. Every post you set, every wire you string, is a statement. It says this is ours, and we'll work for it, fight for it if we have to." The boy's hands, once used for stealing and fighting, now calloused from honest work, gripped the post-hole digger tighter. "Like you fought them, Mr. Sullivan?" Tom nodded. "Fighting's the last resort, son. Building something worth protecting. That's where real strength comes from." Word of Tom's impromptu youth program spread. More kids came, bringing stories of cartel recruiters in their schools, of families pressured to cooperate with smugglers. Tom listened, and he taught. Not just ranching skills, but the lessons that had kept him alive through decades of combat. Sarah Martinez watched this transformation with growing interest. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, she found Tom teaching a group of teenagers basic self-defense moves in the barn. "You're building an army," she observed. Tom shook his head. "I'm building citizens, people who'll stand up for their community, who won't be bullied or bought." The cartel noticed too. Their surveillance teams reported back to El Coyote about the growing number of young people at the ranch, about the changes in their behavior. Kids who once would have become cartel lookouts were now proudly wearing work boots and Stetsons. El Coyote's response was swift. One morning, Miguel didn't show up for work. Tom found him in the hospital, badly beaten. The message was clear: stay away from the ranch. But Miguel surprised everyone. The next day, his arm in a cast, he was back at the ranch gate. "They think they can scare us," he said, his voice shaking but determined, "like they scared our parents, our neighbors. But you showed us different, Mr. Sullivan. You showed us we can fight back." Tom looked at the boy. No, the young man, standing straighter despite his injuries. Something was changing, not just in Miguel, but in the whole community. Fear was giving way to something stronger. In town, small changes began appearing. Shop owners who once quietly paid protection money started refusing. Parents began walking their children to school in groups, wearing shirts with the ranch's brand, a simple S that had become a symbol of resistance. El Coyote watched these changes with growing concern. His lieutenants reported similar problems across their territory. The old SEAL wasn't just defending his ranch anymore, he was inspiring others to stand up, to resist. "Burn it all," El Coyote ordered. "The ranch, the town, everything. Show them what happens to those who defy us." But Tom had anticipated this. The ranch was no longer just his fortress. It had become a training ground, a symbol, a community. The teenagers he'd been teaching had spread his lessons throughout their families and neighborhoods. When cartel enforcers came to torch businesses, they found citizens standing guard. When they tried to intimidate school children, parents formed protection groups. The cartel's intimidation tactics, which had worked for so long, began to fail. Each act of violence was met with unified resistance. Tom's military expertise had been transformed into something more powerful: hope. One evening, as Tom watched, his students practicing ranch work with military precision, Marcus called, "You've started something big, old friend. The cartels are losing their grip. Not just there, it's spreading. Communities all along the border are standing up." Tom looked at Miguel, now teaching younger kids how to mend fences. The boy's eyes were clear, his movements confident. "It was never about the ranch," Tom replied. "It was about showing them they have a choice." The cartel's response was predictable: escalation. They brought in more men, more weapons. But now they weren't facing one old rancher. They were facing an entire community that had learned to stand together. El Coyote himself came to the ranch one night, his convoy of black SUVs kicking up dust on the approach. Tom stood on his porch, watching through his scope as the cartel leader emerged. "You've caused me much trouble, old man," El Coyote called out. "More than you know. My own people are questioning me now. They see what's happening here." "Good," Tom replied. "Let them question, let them see there's another way. I could burn this place to the ground, kill everyone you've tried to protect." Tom's reply was calm. "You could, but you won't break their spirit. That's what really scares you, isn't it? Not me, not my skills. The fact that they're not afraid anymore." As if to prove his point, lights began appearing on the surrounding hills, dozens, then hundreds of them. The community had come, standing silent witness. El Coyote's men shifted nervously, suddenly aware they were surrounded not by warriors, but by something more powerful. United citizens who had lost their fear. "This is your legacy," El Coyote spat, "teaching children to die for nothing." "No," Tom corrected him, "teaching them to live for something. Teaching them that one person standing up can inspire others to stand. That fear only has power if you let it." The cartel leader studied Tom for a long moment, then turned back to his vehicle. As the convoy pulled away, Tom knew this wasn't over. The cartel would try again, probably with even more force. But something had changed fundamentally in the community. The next morning, Tom found more people at his gate. Not just teenagers now, but adults, business owners, teachers. They weren't looking for protection. They were looking to learn, to contribute, to be part of something bigger than themselves. "Well, what do we do now?" Miguel asked, standing beside Tom as they watched the newcomers. Tom smiled. "We build. We teach. We show them that strength isn't just about fighting. It's about creating something worth fighting for." The ranch became more than a fortress. It became a symbol of resistance, of community, of transformation. Tom's military experience found new expression in teaching leadership, organization, and the importance of standing together. The cartel's influence began to wane, not through violence, but through the steady erosion of fear. Communities that had once been silent began to speak out. People who had once looked away began to stand up. Sarah Martinez noticed the change in her deputies too. Those who had taken cartel money found themselves increasingly isolated, while officers who stood firm found support from their communities. "You've started a revolution," she told Tom one evening. "No," he corrected her. "They did. I just showed them it was possible." The transformation wasn't without cost. There were still threats, still violence. But each act of cartel aggression now met with unified resistance. The teenagers Tom had trained became leaders in their own right, organizing neighborhood watches, supporting threatened businesses, protecting the vulnerable. El Coyote made one last attempt to break the community's spirit. He ordered attacks on multiple locations simultaneously: the ranch, the school, businesses that had stopped paying protection. But instead of creating terror, the attacks united the community further. Tom's students, now well-trained in organization and resistance, coordinated the response. Miguel led a group protecting the school. Others organized evacuation plans, communication networks, and support systems. The cartel's attack failed, not because of superior firepower or tactical skill, but because they were fighting an entire community that had learned to stand as one. In the aftermath, Tom stood on his porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. The ranch showed signs of the recent battle, but also of renewal. New buildings were rising stronger than before. The land that had once been his sanctuary had become something more, a beacon of hope, a symbol of resistance, a testament to the power of one person's stand inspiring others to stand too. Miguel joined him, his posture straight, his eyes clear. "They'll come back," the young man said. "Maybe," Tom replied, "but they'll find us stronger each time, not because of weapons or tactics, but because we're building something they can't destroy, a community that stands together." The evening air carried the sounds of work continuing, hammers striking nails, saws cutting wood, voices raised in conversation and laughter. The ranch was no longer just Tom's fortress. It had become the heart of a community that had found its courage. As darkness fell, lights began appearing in the distance, not the threatening headlights of cartel vehicles, but the warm glow of homes where people no longer lived in fear. The transformation Tom had started had taken on a life of its own, spreading hope like wildfire across the border region. The old SEAL smiled, remembering all the battles he'd fought, all the operations he'd led. None of them had achieved what? This had not victory through force of arms, but transformation through the power of inspiration and unity. The war wasn't over. The cartel would try again, probably with new tactics, new threats. But they were no longer fighting one old rancher. They were facing something far more powerful, a community that had discovered its strength, its courage, and its voice. As the stars began appearing over the desert, Tom thought about all the young people who had found purpose at his ranch, all the lives transformed, all the fear replaced with determination. His military career had taught him how to fight, but this was about teaching others how to stand, how to build, how to create something worth defending. The legacy of Iron Tom Sullivan wasn't going to be the battles he'd won, or the enemies he'd defeated. It would be the courage he'd inspired, the community he'd helped build, and the transformation of fear into hope. That he realized was worth more than all the land in Arizona. That was a victory no cartel could ever take away. In Mexico City's upscale Polanco district, El Coyote faced his cartel's board of directors, powerful men who controlled billions. In illegal trade, the meeting room crackled with tension as surveillance footage played on the massive screen, showing communities along the border rising up against cartel control. "One old American," a board member spat, his diamond rings flashing as he gestured angrily. "One retired soldier has caused all this." El Coyote's fingers tightened around his glass of whiskey. Not just him anymore. He's created something worse than resistance. He's given them hope. At the far end of the table, an elderly man cleared his throat. Eduardo Vargas, one of the original cartel founders, spoke rarely but commanded absolute attention. "Perhaps," he said softly, "we've been fighting the wrong war. Violence creates martyrs. Martyrs inspire more resistance." He stood slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the glittering city. "We didn't build this empire through force alone. We built it through corruption, through greed, through human weakness. This Sullivan, he's teaching them strength, so we must make them weak." Again, back at the ranch, Tom was facing challenges of a different kind. Success had brought complications. The informal youth program had grown into something larger, a legitimate foundation offering education, job training, and community support. Donors were interested, politicians were taking notice, and with attention came new threats. "They're trying to audit the foundation," Sarah Martinez told him one morning, reviewing papers in his kitchen, "looking for any excuse to shut it down. And 3 of our biggest donors received threats." Tom poured coffee, his movements deliberate. "Expected that. What else?" "Immigration's sniffing around some of the families in the program, and the state legislature's proposing laws that would make it illegal to operate youth programs without special licensing." "Legal attacks," Tom mused, "harder to fight than bullets." But he had prepared for this too. Years of special operations had taught him that the most important battles often happened in boardrooms, not battlefields. He'd been quietly building a different kind of team: lawyers, accountants, community organizers. Miguel, now running day-to-day operations at the ranch, understood the new challenge. "They're trying to strangle us with red tape," he said during their morning briefing, "make it impossible to operate legally." Tom nodded. "Which means we adapt. Evolution, not revolution." They began restructuring the foundation, creating separate entities for different programs. The ranch became an agricultural training center. The youth program transformed into an accredited educational institution. Every attack through legal channels was met with meticulous compliance and documentation. But El Coyote's new strategy went deeper, Vargas had connections throughout Mexico's and America's business communities. Shell companies began buying land around the ranch, controlling water rights, manipulating local regulations. Tom watched as neighboring ranches were forced to sell, as mysterious environmental concerns suddenly required expensive studies, as building permits were delayed indefinitely. The noose was tightening, not through violence, but through the machinery of bureaucracy. "They're trying to isolate us," Sarah observed, spreading maps across Tom's desk. Red markers showed properties now controlled by cartel front companies. Soon, they'll control every road in and out. Tom studied the map, his tactical mind seeing patterns. "Then we build new roads." He reached out to his old network. Not just military contacts, but intelligence operators who understood this kind of shadow war. They began tracking money flows, exposing connections, applying pressure to corrupt officials. The cartel had decades of experience hiding their operations behind legitimate businesses, but they'd never faced someone who'd spent years unraveling exactly these kinds of networks in places like Afghanistan and Colombia. Tom's team discovered that several shell companies were violating international banking laws. Anonymous tips to federal authorities froze accounts. Environmental concerns were met with counter-studies. Delayed permits were challenged through multiple channels, but the biggest change came from an unexpected source. Maria, Tom's late wife, had been an environmental lawyer before her illness. Her old firm, learning of the ranch's struggles, offered their services pro bono. Maria always said law was another form of warfare. Jennifer Chen, her former partner, told Tom, "She'd be proud to see what you've built here. Let us help protect it." The legal team began turning the cartel's tactics against them. Water rights became a weapon. The ranch's location and historical usage gave them priority claims. Environmental regulations meant to strangle development, instead protected the ranch's operations. Meanwhile, the foundation's success was attracting attention from legitimate organizations. A major technology company looking to invest in rural education offered partnership opportunities. Agricultural universities proposed research collaborations. El Coyote watched his careful plan unravel. The old seal wasn't just fighting back. He was building something stronger, more legitimate, more deeply rooted in the community than the cartel's operations. But Vargas had one more card to play. He arranged a meeting with Tom, not at the ranch but on neutral ground in Tucson. The message came through proper channels, with assurances of safety and legitimacy. Tom agreed, but on his terms. The meeting would be public, in a crowded restaurant. His team would handle security, and federal agents he trusted would be nearby. Vargas arrived alone, an elderly man in an expensive suit who looked more like a professor than a cartel leader. He ordered coffee and spoke perfect English with a Harvard accent. "You've impressed me, Mr. Sullivan," he said quietly. "Few have. It caused us this much inconvenience. But I wonder if you understand what you're really fighting." Tom said nothing, letting the old man continue. "We exist because we serve a purpose. People want what we provide. Drugs, yes, but also opportunity, excitement, escape from mundane lives. You're fighting human nature itself." "No," Tom replied. "I'm showing them a better way to rise." Vargas smiled sadly. "And if I offered to make you rich, to fund your foundation legitimately, to expand your programs across the border, think of how many more lives you could transform." It was a tempting offer. Resources to help more people, to expand the work beyond one ranch and one community. But Tom had seen this strategy before, in war zones across the world. Legitimacy was just another weapon. The money would come with strings, Tom said, subtle ones at first, suggestions about who to help, who to turn away, then requirements. Soon we'd be part of your machine. Is that so terrible? Vargas spread his hands. We could do great things together. Build schools, hospitals, create real opportunities. Built on blood money and broken lives, no deal. Vargas's smile faded. Then you understand, this can't continue. One way or another, we will restore order. Order through fear isn't order at all. As Tom stood to leave, Vargas called after him. You're fighting a losing battle, Mr. Sullivan. Human weakness will always exist. I'm not fighting weakness, Tom replied. I'm building strength. The meeting had confirmed Tom's suspicions. The cartel was desperate, resorting to legitimate tactics because their usual methods had failed. But it also warned him that the real battle was just beginning. Back at the ranch, he gathered his team, not just Miguel and the youth leaders, but the lawyers, teachers, and community organizers who had joined the cause. They offered partnership, he told them, legitimate funding, expansion opportunities. Jennifer Chen nodded. Classic legitimization strategy. They've used it before with other organizations. But we're different, Miguel said firmly. We're built on something stronger than money. Tom looked at the faces around him, young and old, from different backgrounds but united in purpose. We're at a turning point. They'll come at us through legal channels, through economic pressure, through every weakness they can find. This is where we prove what we're really made of. The next phase of the battle unfolded in courtrooms, board meetings, and regulatory offices. The cartel's resources seemed unlimited, but Tom's team had something stronger: legitimate purpose and community support. When the cartel's shell companies tried to restrict water access, local farmers rallied to share resources. When building permits were delayed, volunteers provided labor and materials. When donors were threatened, new supporters emerged. The foundation began documenting its successes: reduced crime rates, improved education outcomes, growing small businesses. Each attack was met with evidence of positive impact. The narrative shifted from conflict to transformation. Vargas watched these developments with growing concern. The cartel's board was losing patience. Their influence along the border was eroding not through force, but through hope. In a final desperate move, they attempted to turn the community against itself. Rumors spread about misused funds. Anonymous tips suggested illegal activities. Past criminal records of program participants were leaked to the media. But the community had grown stronger than fear. Parents defended the program that had transformed their children. Business owners testified about reduced crime and increased prosperity. Even past opponents spoke up about positive changes they'd witnessed. Tom stood on his porch one evening, watching the sun set behind mountains that had seen so much change. Miguel joined him, no longer the angry teenager, but a confident leader. You know what really defeated them? Miguel asked. Not the lawyers, or the regulations, or even the community support. It was showing people they had value, that they could be more than what the cartel said they could be. Tom nodded. The real victory hadn't been in fighting the cartel, but in building something stronger than their influence. The ranch had become more than a fortress or a symbol. It was a testament to human potential. In Mexico City, Vargas submitted his resignation from the cartel's board. His final report was brief. "We cannot defeat what we don't understand." Sullivan's greatest weapon wasn't his military training or his tactical skill. It was his ability to show people their own strength. The transformation continued, spreading beyond one ranch and one community. Other towns began adopting similar programs. The model of resistance through empowerment gained attention from organizations working in conflict zones worldwide. Tom's legacy wouldn't be the battles he'd won or the enemies he'd defeated. It would be the lives transformed, the communities strengthened, and the proof that one person standing up could inspire others to find their own strength. The ranch still stood, its buildings marked by past conflicts but strengthened by purpose. Every day, people came to learn, to grow, to discover their potential. The war hadn't been won through force, but through the power of hope and the strength of united community. As darkness fell over the desert, lights appeared across the valley. Not cartel vehicles or surveillance teams, but homes and businesses where people lived without fear. The transformation Tom had started had taken root, growing into something even he hadn't imagined. The cartel's influence hadn't been broken by bullets or bombs, but by something far more powerful: the awakening of human dignity and the discovery of collective strength. That was a victory that would endure long after the battles were forgotten. The red dawn painted the Sierra Mountains in shades of blood and gold as 3 black helicopters thundered across the border, their sleek shapes barely visible against the darkened sky. Inside the lead aircraft, Commander Victor Ramirez, head of an elite Mexican Special Forces unit, studied satellite imagery of Sullivan's ranch. This wasn't a cartel operation anymore. This was a government mission, officially sanctioned at the highest levels. El Coyote had powerful friends in Mexico City. After the cartel's humiliating defeats, strings were pulled, favors called in. Sullivan's success in uniting border communities against cartel influence had been reframed as a threat to national security. Now, Ramirez had authorization to end the insurgency by any means necessary. "Target is 2 minutes out," the pilot announced in crisp Spanish. Ramirez nodded, checking his tactical gear one final time. Unlike the cartel's hired guns, his men were true professionals, veterans of counter-terrorism operations, trained by American and Israeli specialists. But something bothered him about this mission. In 20 years of military service, he'd learned to trust his instincts. The intelligence briefing had painted Sullivan as a dangerous, radical building, a private army. But the surveillance footage showed something different: a community center, educational programs, legitimate businesses. "Commence insertion," Ramirez ordered, pushing his doubts aside. The helicopters split formation, each taking pre-assigned positions around the sprawling ranch complex. Dawn was the perfect time for assault. Most people were still sleeping. Reactions were slower, confusion maximized. But as they began their descent, Ramirez noticed something odd. There was no element of surprise. Lights were already on in the main buildings. People were moving with purpose, not panic. Through his tactical scope, he could see children being calmly evacuated to underground shelters while adults took defensive positions. "They knew we were coming," his second-in-command muttered. Of course they knew, Ramirez thought. Sullivan wasn't just some retired SEAL playing rancher. He had connections, resources, a network of his own. The mission was compromised before it began. On the ground, Tom Sullivan watched the helicopters through high-powered binoculars. Shadow lay at his feet, the dog's muscles tense but controlled. Years of combat experience told Tom these weren't cartel forces. The flight patterns, the equipment, the precision, all screamed military. "They're getting desperate," Miguel said from beside him. The young man had grown into a capable leader, his former gang tattoos now covered by the sleeves of a business suit. He ran the Foundation's daily operations while studying law at night. Tom nodded. Cartels using government connections now. Means we're winning. "The evacuation's complete," Miguel reported. "All non-essential personnel are in the bunkers. Security teams are in position. Media has been notified." That last part was crucial. Tom's network had leaked information about the impending raid to specific journalists. Within hours, news helicopters would arrive, making it impossible for this to be swept under the rug. The Mexican helicopters touched down in a cloud of dust, disgorging teams of heavily armed soldiers. Their movements were precise, professional. These weren't thugs with guns, but trained special forces. They advanced in textbook formation, covering every angle. Commander Ramirez's voice boomed through a loudspeaker in perfect English. "Thomas Sullivan, by authority of the Mexican government, you are ordered to surrender. Your facility has been designated a threat to national security." Tom's response came not through words, but action. Spotlights suddenly illuminated the entire complex, revealing not a paramilitary camp, but a legitimate community center. Banners announced educational programs, agricultural training, youth outreach initiatives. Security cameras streamed everything live to multiple news outlets. "Quite a threat we've got here," Tom's voice carried clearly across the pre-dawn air. "Maybe your men would like to tour our library or visit the computer lab where we teach coding to local kids?" Ramirez felt his unease growing. This wasn't the insurgent base he'd been briefed about. Through his tactical scope, he could see classrooms, workshops, medical facilities, all legitimate, all documented. His orders suddenly felt very wrong. "We have authorization to use lethal force," Ramirez warned, but his voice lacked conviction. "Against what?" Tom emerged slowly, hands raised. "Teachers? Students? Look around you, Commander. Look at what you're really being asked to destroy." More lights came on, revealing the full scope of the facility. Agricultural projects using advanced irrigation techniques, solar power installations, medical clinics serving both sides of the border, everything meticulously documented, fully licensed, internationally recognized. "Your intelligence is cartel propaganda," Tom continued. "They couldn't beat us with violence, so they're trying to use you, making you do their dirty work while keeping their hands clean." Ramirez hesitated. His orders were clear, but 20 years of military service had taught him to recognize truth when he heard it. He'd seen too many good soldiers used as tools by corrupt officials. "Our orders come from the highest levels," Ramirez said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "I'm sure they do. The cartel's influence runs deep. But ask yourself, what are you really protecting? Their power, their profits, or are you serving the people you swore to defend?" The sun was rising now, painting the scene in stark relief. News helicopters appeared on the horizon, right on schedule. Whatever happened next would be witnessed by millions. Ramirez made his decision. "Stand down," he ordered his men. "Mission compromised, full withdrawal." But it wasn't over. As his men began retreating to their helicopters, gunfire erupted from the surrounding hills. Cartel assassins, positioned to eliminate anyone who failed to complete their mission. "Ambush!" Ramirez shouted, diving for cover. His men scattered, caught between multiple firing positions. Tom's response was immediate. Miguel, get our people back to the shelters. Sarah, call in our federal contacts. Commander, get your men inside our perimeter. The Mexican Special Forces found themselves fighting alongside the very people they'd come to eliminate. Tom's security teams, well-trained locals who knew every inch of the terrain, provided covering fire as Ramirez's men retreated to defensive positions. Shadow bounded through the chaos, leading groups to safety with uncanny intelligence. The dog had been trained not just for combat, but for search and rescue, and now those skills saved lives as he guided people through pre-planned evacuation routes. From his command center, Tom coordinated the response with the efficiency of a veteran operator. His years of special operations experience merged with intimate knowledge of the terrain, creating a defense that the cartel hadn't anticipated. "They're trying to eliminate witnesses," he told Ramirez as they worked together to organize the defense. "Can't have Mexican special forces telling the truth about what they found here." Ramirez nodded grimly. "My men were set up, used as pawns, Mum." "Welcome to the real war," Tom replied. "Not against me, not against this ranch, but against the corruption eating away at both our countries." The battle that followed wasn't just about survival, it was about truth. News helicopters captured everything. Mexican special forces fighting alongside American civilians, cartel assassins attacking legitimate government troops, a community center defending itself against corrupt powers. Tom's years of preparation proved their worth. Hidden defensive positions, pre-sighted fields of fire, underground evacuation routes, everything served a purpose. But more importantly, the community responded as one. There was no panic, no chaos, just disciplined resistance against a common enemy. Miguel coordinated civilian evacuation with military precision, his street smarts combining with formal tactical training. Sarah Martinez arrived with trustworthy federal agents, creating a legal witness presence that would be impossible to dismiss. The cartel assassins, expecting to find easy targets, instead met coordinated resistance from multiple directions. Tom's security teams, many former gang members now trained in legitimate defensive tactics, demonstrated the transformation that the Foundation had created. By mid-morning, it was over. The cartel attackers had been captured or driven off. News. Crews were broadcasting live, showing the world the truth about Sullivan's ranch. Mexican special forces stood alongside American civilians, their shared defense impossible to deny or cover up. Commander Ramirez faced the cameras, his integrity overcoming his orders. "We were misled," he stated clearly. "This facility is no threat. It is a model of cross-border cooperation and community development. Those who ordered its destruction must be investigated." The aftermath brought changes no one had expected. The attempted raid, meant to destroy the Foundation, instead exposed the depth of cartel influence in Mexican government. International attention forced investigations, revealing corruption at the highest levels. But more importantly, it showed the power of transformation. Former enemies became allies. Military precision merged with community spirit. The very forces sent to destroy the ranch became its defenders. Tom found Ramirez standing at the main gate as sunset approached. The commander was watching Foundation students clean up debris, working alongside his soldiers. "Your men fought well today," Tom said. Ramirez nodded. "They fought for truth, something we don't get to do often enough." He turned to face Tom. "You've built something remarkable here. Not just the facilities, but the spirit. These people, They stand together, fight together, rebuild together. That's the real victory, Tom agreed. Not beating the cartels, but showing people their own strength, making them believe in something bigger than fear. The news coverage continued. For weeks, every investigation, every revealed connection, every exposed corruption reinforced the Foundation's legitimacy. But the real story wasn't in the headlines. It was in the daily transformations continuing at the ranch. Miguel expanded the youth program, now including leadership training for former gang members. Sarah Martinez developed new community policing initiatives based on the ranch's security model. Commander Ramirez established official training exchanges between his unit and the Foundation's security teams. The cartel's influence didn't disappear overnight, but their power began to crumble, not through violence or force, but through the steady erosion of fear and the growth of community strength. Tom watched it all from his porch, Shadow still faithfully at his side. The ranch had become more than he'd ever imagined, not just a sanctuary or a symbol, but a catalyst for real change. One evening, as the sun painted the mountains in familiar shades of gold and crimson, Miguel joined him. "You know what I realized?" The young man said. "We didn't just beat them, we made them irrelevant. Every kid we educate, every family we help, every community we strengthen, that's one less resource for their power." Tom nodded. The real victory wasn't in fighting darkness, but in creating light. The Foundation wasn't just resisting evil, it was building something good. The transformation continued, spreading beyond the ranch, beyond the border region. Other communities began adopting the model, creating their own programs based on education, opportunity, and united resistance to corruption. Commander Ramirez's unit became partners in legitimate cross-border security initiatives. Their experience with the ranch showed how military precision could serve community development instead of oppression. The cartel's board of directors faced their own reckonings. As investigations unfolded, their legitimate business fronts crumbled. More importantly, their power base eroded as communities learned to stand together. But the most profound changes were personal. Former gang members became community leaders. Corrupt officials found the courage to resist bribes. People who had lived in fear found their voice, their strength, their purpose. Tom's military experience had taught him that the hardest victories aren't won through force, but through transformation. The ranch had become proof of this, not a fortress against evil, but a beacon of possibility. As night fell over the desert, lights appeared across the valley, not cartel vehicles or surveillance teams, but homes and businesses where people lived without fear. The transformation Tom had started had grown beyond him, beyond the ranch, beyond any single person or place. Shadow's ears perked up at approaching footsteps. Sarah Martinez arrived with new reports. More communities requesting program guidance, more officials stepping forward to expose corruption, more lives being transformed. "Sometimes I wonder," she said, "if this was your plan all along. Not just defending your ranch, but starting something bigger." Tom smiled. His military career had taught him that the best strategies often emerge from necessity, that true strength comes from adapting to challenges rather than forcing predetermined plans. "The ranch was just the beginning," he said. "The real mission is helping people find their own strength." The desert wind carried the sounds of the evening program, young voices learning, practicing, growing. Each one represented a victory not won through violence, but through transformation. The war wasn't over, but its nature had changed. The front lines weren't marked by bullets and blood, but by choices and changes. Each person who chose hope over fear, unity over division, construction over destruction, marked another victory. Tom Sullivan, the old warrior, had found his greatest victory not in defeating enemies, but in building allies. His legacy wouldn't be the battles he'd won, but the lives he'd helped transform. The ranch stood as testament not to the power of resistance, but to the strength of renewal. Its buildings, once marked by conflict, now housed dreams and possibilities. Its land, once a battlefield, now nurtured growth and hope. As the stars emerged over the desert, Tom knew that the real story wasn't about one old seal defending his land. It was about the power of one person's stand to inspire others, about the strength that comes from standing together, about the transformation that begins when people discover their own worth. That was a victory no cartel could ever take away. A midnight meeting in Dubai's glittering financial district brought together the world's most dangerous forces, not just cartel leaders, but representatives from criminal organizations across the globe. The Sullivan situation had evolved beyond a local problem. His success in rallying communities against organized crime was spreading, threatening operations worldwide. In a penthouse suite of the Burj Khalifa, Viktor Petrov, head of the Russian Mafia's international division, addressed the gathering. Our associates in Mexico have failed repeatedly against one retired American soldier. This is unacceptable. The Sullivan model of resistance is spreading. Communities in Eastern Europe are already attempting to replicate his methods. The Yakuza representative nodded gravely. Similar problems have emerged in Southeast Asia. His foundation's approach to community empowerment threatens decades of carefully cultivated influence. El Coyote, still nursing wounds to both his body and pride, spoke next. Traditional methods have failed. Force, intimidation, corruption, nothing works against him. He transforms our weapons into his strengths. Then we change the game entirely. A new voice cut through the discussion. Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, former CIA psychological operations specialist now working as a private consultant, stepped forward. Her presence at this gathering of criminals indicated how serious the situation had become. Sullivan's strength isn't his military training or his tactical skills, she continued. It's his ability to inspire hope, to show people they have power. So we don't attack him, we attack hope itself. The midnight breeze carried whispers of change across the Arizona desert. At Sullivan's ranch, Tom stood on his porch, studying satellite imagery on a secure tablet. His intelligence network had evolved far beyond local informants. Now it included former special operations colleagues working in private security firms worldwide. The reports were troubling. Unprecedented cooperation between criminal organizations, massive fund transfers, mysterious gatherings in Dubai. They're mobilizing globally, he told Sarah Martinez over encrypted comms. This isn't just about the ranch anymore. They're scared of what we represent. Sarah's voice crackled through the secure line. We've detected unusual financial movements, shell companies liquidating assets, new corporations forming. They're restructuring their entire operation. Tom had expected escalation, but this was different. The cartels weren't just sending gunmen anymore, they were changing their fundamental approach. This would require a new kind of defense, one that went beyond physical security. Behind the gleaming towers of Shanghai's financial district, in a private room of an exclusive restaurant, Lin Wei studied reports from his global intelligence network. As head of one of Asia's largest criminal enterprises, he had watched Sullivan's influence spread like wildfire across continents. What started as one old soldier defending his ranch had evolved into a worldwide movement, threatening decades of carefully cultivated criminal power structures. "The Americans have a saying," Lynn told his assembled lieutenants. "Cut off the head of the snake." But Sullivan isn't a snake. He's created something far more dangerous. Hope is like a hydra. Cut off one head, two more grow in its place. The massive view screen behind him displayed footage from around the world, communities in Eastern Europe organizing neighborhood watches based on Sullivan's model, South American villages establishing their own educational programs, Asian port, cities creating citizen oversight committees. Everywhere, the old patterns of corruption and intimidation were being challenged. "Our traditional methods have failed," Lynn continued. "Violence makes him stronger. Legal attacks legitimize his cause. Economic pressure unites communities against us. We need something new, something that attacks not just Sullivan, but the very foundation of what he's built." Across the globe, in a fortified compound deep in the Siberian wilderness, Viktor Petrov reached similar conclusions. The Russian crime lord had lost 3 major operations in the past month alone, all to citizen groups inspired by Sullivan's success. His phone buzzed, a secure message from El Coyote proposing an unprecedented alliance. Meanwhile, at the ranch, Tom Sullivan sensed the changing winds. His military training had taught him to read patterns, to anticipate threats before they materialized. The usual cartel surveillance teams had withdrawn, local pressure had eased, even the legal challenges had mysteriously disappeared. "They're planning something big," he told Miguel during their morning briefing. The young man had grown into a confident leader, now running most of the Foundation's daily operations. "This quiet, it's not surrender, it's preparation." Miguel nodded, pulling up satellite imagery on the command center's main screen. "Our contacts in Asia have reported unusual movements. Major criminal organizations liquidating assets, consolidating resources. Something's coming, but it's different this time." Sarah Martinez arrived with more troubling news. "We've detected massive data-gathering operations. They're collecting information on everyone connected to the Foundation. Staff, students, families, supporters. This isn't about physical attacks anymore." Tom understood. The enemy was evolving, adapting to their successes. Physical force had failed. Legal challenges had backfired. Now they were shifting to something more insidious, information warfare. "They'll try to destroy what we've built from the inside," Tom said. "Turn people against each other, break the trust we've established. We need to prepare for a different kind of battle." The first attacks came subtly, small inconsistencies. In Foundation records appeared, suggesting financial impropriety. Anonymous sources leaked partial documents hinting at corruption. Social media campaigns questioned the program's methods and motives. But Tom had prepared for this too. Years of special operations had taught him the importance of information security. Every transaction was meticulously documented. Every program was transparently operated. The Foundation's books were open to public scrutiny. "They're trying to create doubt," he explained to his team. "Doubt is more dangerous than bullets. It spreads faster, cuts deeper, destroys from within." The Global Criminal Alliance escalated their campaign. Professional disinformation teams worked around the clock, creating elaborate false narratives. Deep-fake videos showed Foundation members engaging in illegal activities. Artificial intelligence generated convincing evidence of wrongdoing. But the Foundation's greatest strength wasn't in its defenses. It was in the communities it had built. When fake videos appeared, people who knew the truth stood up. When false documents circulated, those who had experienced the program's benefits spoke out. The Alliance's next move was more personal. They began targeting individual success stories, trying to discredit the Foundation's achievements. Former gang members who had transformed their lives found their past mistakes exposed. Families who had escaped cartel influence faced renewed pressure. But these attacks backfired spectacularly. Instead of hiding from their pasts, program graduates spoke openly about their transformations. Their honesty and transparency became powerful weapons against the campaign of lies. Miguel, whose own journey from street gang to community leader was well documented, took center stage. "They think our past mistakes make us weak," he told a gathering of international media. "But acknowledging where we came from, showing how we've changed, that's real strength." The Criminal Alliance's frustration grew. Their most sophisticated psychological operations were being countered not by expert propaganda, but by simple truth. Communities that had experienced real transformation couldn't be turned against themselves. Lin Wei, watching from Shanghai, recognized the pattern. Sullivan's greatest weapon isn't his military training or his tactical skill. It's his understanding of human nature. He knows that truth, once experienced, can't be unmade by lies. The Alliance made one final, desperate attempt to destroy the Foundation's credibility. They launched a coordinated campaign suggesting that the entire operation was a front for American intelligence services, a sophisticated plot to extend U.S. influence. Tom's response was characteristic. He opened the ranch's doors completely. International observers were invited to examine every aspect of the operation. Students, staff, and community members spoke freely about their experiences. The Foundation's entire history was laid bare for the world to see. "We have nothing to hide," Tom told the assembled media, "because we're not hiding anything. This isn't about politics or power. It's about people discovering their own strength." The Alliance's campaign collapsed under the weight of reality. Their sophisticated lies couldn't compete with thousands of genuine stories of transformation. Their artificial evidence was overwhelmed by authentic experiences. Their attempts to create division only strengthened community bonds. But Tom knew this wasn't the end. The criminal organizations would adapt, find new angles of attack, seek new vulnerabilities. The Foundation needed to evolve too, to strengthen its resilience against future challenges. He gathered his team, not just the ranch's staff, but representatives from similar programs that had sprung up worldwide. Together, they began developing new strategies for protecting their communities from information warfare. "The next battle won't be fought with guns or propaganda," Tom explained. "It'll be fought with truth, transparency, and trust. We need to build communities that are not just physically strong, but mentally and emotionally resilient." The Foundation expanded its programs to include media literacy, critical thinking, and digital security. Students learned not just how to resist criminal influence, but how to recognize and counter disinformation. The very attacks meant to destroy them became teaching tools for building stronger communities. Sarah Martinez, who had watched the Foundation grow from a local security operation to a global movement, understood the significance of this evolution. "We're not just teaching people to defend themselves physically anymore. We're teaching them to defend their minds, their truth, their hope." The Criminal Alliance's campaign had failed, but it had taught valuable lessons. The Foundation's influence couldn't be destroyed by force or lies because it wasn't built on power or deception. It was built on real transformation, on genuine human connections. on the unshakable strength of awakened communities. Tom stood on his porch as sunset painted the desert in familiar shades of gold and crimson. Shadow lay at his feet, the loyal dog's presence a reminder of simpler days when the challenges were more straightforward. But he didn't miss those times. The Foundation's evolution had shown him something more powerful than any weapon: the resilience of the human spirit. Miguel joined him, tablet in hand, showing reports from Foundation programs worldwide. "You know what really defeated them?" the young man asked. "Not our security measures, or our documentation, or even our transparency. It was the fact that we're real. Everything they tried to fake, we actually are." Tom nodded. His military career had taught him about power, about force, about strategy. But his work with the Foundation had taught him about something stronger. The power of genuine transformation, of lived truth, of unshakable hope. The sun dipped below the horizon, but light still burned in the Foundation's buildings. Classes were in session, community meetings were ongoing, lives were being changed. The work never really ended, but that was its strength. Real transformation wasn't a single battle to be won, but a continuous process of growth and renewal. In his Shanghai office, Lin Wei drafted his final report to the Criminal Alliance. "Sullivan has not built an organization," he wrote. "He has sparked a movement. We cannot destroy it because it lives not in buildings or programs, but in changed hearts and minds." Viktor Petrov, reading the report in his Siberian compound, understood. Their sophisticated campaign of lies had been defeated not by better lies, but by simple truth. Their attempts to create division had failed because they didn't understand what really united people. Not fear or force, but hope and genuine transformation. El Coyote, the last to admit defeat, finally recognized what they were really fighting. Sullivan hadn't just defended his ranch or built a foundation. He had demonstrated something far more dangerous to their power: the possibility of positive change, the strength of united communities, the power of lived truth against manufactured lies. The Global Criminal Alliance dissolved, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Their most sophisticated operation had failed, not because they weren't clever enough, but because they were fighting something they couldn't understand: the authentic transformation of human lives. Back at the ranch, Tom reviewed plans for the Foundation's next evolution. The attacks had shown them their strengths and their vulnerabilities. They would build on both, creating something even stronger. Not just a program for change, but a movement for transformation that couldn't be stopped by force or lies. The desert wind carried the sounds of evening activities, classes ending, community meetings beginning, lives continuing to change. Tom Sullivan, the old warrior, had found his greatest victory not in defeating enemies, but in building something they couldn't defeat: genuine hope, authentic transformation, unshakable truth. As stars began appearing in the desert sky, Tom thought about all the battles he'd fought, all the enemies he'd faced. None had taught him more than this last campaign: that the strongest defense isn't weapons or walls or even wisdom, but the power of transformed lives standing together in truth. Shadow's ears perked up at approaching footsteps. Sarah Martinez arrived with reports from Foundation programs worldwide. Communities were not just resisting criminal influence. They were creating something new, something stronger, something built on truth and transformation rather than fear and force. "You know what really won this battle?" Sarah asked, watching. Students leave evening classes, their faces bright with purpose and possibility. Tom smiled, understanding what she meant. The foundation hadn't just survived the attacks, it had grown stronger through them. Each attempt to destroy it had only proved its authenticity, demonstrated its resilience, confirmed its truth. "We won," he said quietly, "because we're real." The desert night deepened. Stars scattered across the vast Arizona sky like diamonds on black velvet. But the lights in the foundation's buildings still burned. Lives were still being transformed. Hope was still growing stronger than fear. Tom Sullivan, the old warrior, had found his greatest victory not in defeating lies, but in nurturing truth. His legacy wouldn't be the battles he'd won, but the transformations he'd inspired. Genuine, unshakable, real. That was a victory no force could ever take away. The thunderous roar of military helicopters shattered the pre-dawn silence over Mexico City. In a heavily guarded compound on the outskirts of the metropolis, El Coyote watched live satellite feeds with growing concern. His vast criminal empire, built over decades through violence and corruption, was crumbling. Not from government intervention or rival cartels, but from something far more dangerous, hope. "They're mobilizing," his intelligence chief reported, pointing to multiple screens showing military movements across the region. National Guard units, federal police, even some military elements we don't control. They're all converging. El Coyote nodded grimly. The recent global campaign of disinformation against Sullivan's foundation had backfired spectacularly. Instead of destroying the movement, it had exposed the depth of criminal influence in governments worldwide. Now, legitimate authorities were finally taking action. "Sullivan!" El Coyote spat the name like a curse. "One old American soldier. How did he cause all this?" But he knew the answer. Sullivan hadn't just defended his ranch or built a foundation. He had created something that could topple empires, communities united against corruption, people who had lost their fear, a movement that couldn't be stopped by bullets or bribes. Miles away, in the heart of the city, Elena Ramirez clutched a worn photograph of her brother Diego, the Special Forces commander who had died protecting Sullivan's ranch during the last major cartel assault. She had spent months infiltrating El Coyote's organization, gathering intelligence, waiting for this moment. "Phase 1 is complete," she reported through secure channels to a hidden command center. "The cartel's defensive positions are compromised. Their loyal police units have been identified and isolated." Tom Sullivan's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Remember, Eleanor, this isn't about revenge, it's about transformation." Eleanor touched her brother's photo. Diego had understood that in his final moments, choosing to defend what Sullivan had built rather than follow corrupt orders. Now she would finish what he started. At the ranch, Tom coordinated operations from a sophisticated command center built into an underground bunker. Screens showed real-time feeds from across Mexico and beyond. Years of preparation had led to this moment, not just a battle against one cartel, but a synchronized global operation against organized crime. Multiple targets acquiring position, Sarah Martinez reported, monitoring tactical feeds. She had evolved from local deputy to international law enforcement liaison, helping coordinate police forces across borders. Miguel, now running the Foundation's strategic operations, pointed to a digital map showing cartel assets worldwide. Their financial networks are exposed. Banking systems are flagging suspicious transactions. Every shell company, every front, organization, every corrupt official we identified, all being hit simultaneously. Tom nodded, remembering all the battles that had led to this point. This isn't just about taking down criminals, it's about building something better in their place. The foundation had grown far beyond its original mission. What started as one man defending his ranch had become a global movement for positive change. Communities worldwide had adopted their methods, creating networks of resistance and transformation that couldn't be broken by force or fear. As dawn broke over Mexico City, the first raids began. But these weren't typical police actions. Each tactical team was accompanied by community leaders, social workers, educators, people ready to fill the void left by falling criminal empires. El Coyote watched in disbelief as his carefully constructed world collapsed. Trusted lieutenants surrendered without resistance. Corrupt officials resigned rather than face exposure. Bank accounts were frozen, properties seized, supply lines dismantled. "It's over," his security chief announced, laying down his weapon. "The people, they're not afraid anymore." That was Sullivan's true victory. He hadn't just built better defenses or gathered better intelligence. He had shown people their own strength, taught them to stand together, created something that couldn't be destroyed by violence or corruption. At the ranch, Tom received updates from around the world. Similar operations were unfolding across continents. Criminal organizations that had dominated for generations were falling not to superior firepower, but to united communities that had lost their fear. Elena's voice came through the command channel. "El Coyote is cornered. But there's something else, something you need to see." In the Cartel compound, she found a hidden room filled with children's drawings, family photos, letters from parents begging for help. Even the mighty drug lord had a human side, a family he wanted to protect. "Bring him in alive," Tom ordered. "Show him there's another way." The final confrontation wasn't the bloodbath many expected. El Coyote, seeing his empire crumble, his men surrender, his power evaporate, made a choice that surprised everyone. "My grandson," he told Elena, pulling out a phone, showing a young boy's photo. "He asked me last week why people are afraid of us. I couldn't answer him." Tom's voice came through Elena's earpiece. "Tell him there's a place for everyone in what we're building, even old enemies." The day unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Across Mexico, across the world, criminal empires fell not through violence, but through transformation. Communities stepped up to fill power vacuums. Programs modeled on Sullivan's foundation provided alternatives to crime and corruption. But the real victory wasn't in what was destroyed. It was in what was built in its place. Former cartel members found new purpose in community service. Corrupt officials worked to repair the systems they had damaged. Even El Coyote, under protective custody, began sharing insights that would help prevent others from following his path. At sunset, Tom stood on his porch, watching the sky paint the desert in familiar shades of gold and crimson. Shadow lay at his feet, grey now around the muzzle, but still alert and loyal. "You know what really won this war?" Miguel asked, joining his mentor. "Not the raids or the intelligence or even the global coordination. It was proving there's a better way." Tom nodded. His military career had taught him how to fight enemies. But his work with the Foundation had taught him something more valuable: how to transform them into allies. Sarah Martinez arrived with final reports from the day's operations. "The numbers are still coming in, but it's unprecedented. Criminal organizations dismantled, corruption exposed, communities empowered, and almost no bloodshed. Because we didn't just defeat them," Tom said quietly. We showed them a different path. Elena joined them, having completed her mission. She carried her brother Diego's photo and something else, a child's drawing from El Coyote's compound. "Even the worst of them have humanity," she said. They just forgot how to show it. The Foundation's next phase was already beginning. Programs to reintegrate former cartel members into legitimate society. Support for families affected by organized crime. Education initiatives to prevent future generations from falling into old patterns. "This is the real work," Tom told his team. "Not fighting darkness, but building light." Reports continued flowing in from around the world. Communities that had lived under criminal control for generations were discovering their own strength. The Foundation's model of transformation was being adapted to local needs, creating sustainable change. Even in prison, El Coyote contributed. His insights helped identify vulnerable communities, expose corruption networks, prevent criminal organizations from regaining power. His grandson visited regularly, now proud that his grandfather was helping make the world better. The Foundation evolved to meet new challenges. What started as a defensive strategy became a model for positive social transformation. Tom's military experience found new expression in teaching leadership, organization, and the importance of standing together. Shadow's ears perked up at approaching vehicles. But these weren't cartel convoys or government raiders. They were families arriving for evening programs, community leaders coming to share successes, people building something new from the ashes of old fears. "You know what amazes me?" Sarah said, watching the arrivals. "How fast things change once people lose their fear. All those years of cartel control, gone in months once communities learned to stand together." Tom smiled, remembering all the battles that had led to this moment. Fear is their weapon. Hope is ours. And hope, when it takes root, grows stronger than any fear. The desert wind carried voices from the Foundation's buildings, classes in session, community meetings, lives being transformed. What had started as one man's stand against evil had become a worldwide movement for positive change. Elena studied her brother's photo one last time before placing it in an album of Foundation history. "Diego would be proud," she said. "Not just of what we destroyed, but of what we built in its place." Miguel, who had grown from angry teenager to respected leader, nodded. "That's Sullivan's real legacy, not teaching us how to fight, but showing us how to build." As night fell over the desert, lights appeared across the valley, not cartel vehicles or surveillance teams, but homes where people lived without fear. The transformation that had started at one ranch had spread across continents, changing not just communities, but the very nature of power. Tom Sullivan, the old warrior, had found his greatest victory not in defeating enemies, but in transforming them. His legacy wouldn't be the battles he'd won, but the hope he'd inspired. Genuine, unshakable, real. The Foundation's work continued, evolving to meet new challenges. But its core principle remained unchanged. Showing people their own strength, teaching them to stand together, creating something that couldn't be destroyed by force or fear. That was a victory that would endure long after the battles were forgotten. Shadow pressed against Tom's leg, and he reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears. Together, they watched the desert stars appear, each one a reminder that light always overcomes darkness, that hope always grows stronger than fear. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Building something new, something better, Something based on hope instead of fear. That was a mission worthy of an old warrior's final chapter. And as the desert night deepened, Tom Sullivan knew that his greatest battles hadn't been fought with weapons, but with hope. His most powerful victories hadn't come through destroying enemies, but through transforming them. That was a legacy that would live forever in changed lives and renewed communities, in people who had discovered their own strength and learned to stand together. The old warrior had found his peace not in victory through force, but in triumph through transformation. And that was a battle worth fighting until the end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.